I'd have to get more into that specific situation. So, John, you can email us at dol.safety@illinois.gov, and I can directly answer that question. But generally, if you are a political subdivision of the state of Illinois and you have some type of public responsibility, you're subject to the Open Meetings Act, for example, you have a public budget, then you're probably under our jurisdiction. If not, you're either under us or federal OSHA. So it'll be one or the other, and I can address that for you if you email us. We can get back to you on that. Do local governmental units which do not have taxing authority? Okay, same thing. Okay. Can we get a copy of the slides? I'm sure we can facilitate that. We can probably post that up to our website. And COVID hospitalization. So we are going to go into that in detail in this presentation. So we will cover COVID hospitalizations. And if at that point you still have some questions, we'll be happy to get back to you. Training materials on OSHA.gov, available in any other language. I know federal OSHA does provide a variety of training materials in Spanish. I haven't seen a lot of other languages, but there are some limited materials in Spanish.
Hey Eric, I can take that one.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So if we go to, I'm going to pull it up here. If we go to this OSHA.gov website here under training, they have under the training topics, they have it in different languages, Spanish and English, and this is where you can find that. Every now and then, based on industry specific, they'll have it in other languages, but primarily it's just English and Spanish. So there you go, Eric.
Awesome, thank you. Looks like the last question that I'm seeing right now, does work comp automatically notify OSHA? No, you as the employer are responsible for notifying us if there is a reporting requirement, and HAP will go into that. You saw that brief infographic. If there is a fatality, a work-related fatality of an employee, you have an 8-hour oral reporting notification. You have to call the hotline. And additionally, you have 24 hours if there's an amputation, a loss of an eye, or an inpatient hospitalization. So it's not just an ER visit, treated and released. It's an employee that was injured, work-related, and they were admitted to the hospital, or they lost an eye, or they had an amputation. Will OSHA only come out to inspect if there is a complaint? No, we covered several different instances where there could be an inspection earlier. Could be a program planned inspection of a fire department, a water, a sewer, a street department. Could be a complaint. It could be a referral. One of us could see something and could initiate an inspection. Federal OSHA could refer something to us. There could be a fatality or a severe injury, a hospitalization. So there are a variety of ways that we could come out and do an inspection. And let's talk about the general duty clause. Hap, are you going to cover anything about the general duty clause in a bit? Okay. So in general, we do apply the general duty clause in the same method as federal OSHA. We cite out of the state act, 820 ILCS instead of the federal OSHA act. But in general, we do apply the general duty clause in the same manner that federal OSHA does.
What do you think, Eric? It's about time to move on. If they got other specific questions, we're going to try to leave time at the end.
Yeah, I think we're good for now. Thanks.
Okay. Is that Pat?
Yep.
All right. So we good, Pat? Ready to move on?
We're good. Thank you.
All right. So we're going to move on here. And again, sorry about that chiming. That's a note for next time. Again, I stated earlier, this is the first time we're doing it, so I will find that setting. I've tried to do it while Eric was addressing questions. We'll turn that off definitely for next time, because we've got almost 700 people coming on the line. Every time that somebody enters, it chimes. Okay. Next slide. Now we're going to get into COVID-19 record keeping. Again, this is COVID-19 record keeping, not an overview of what record keeping is or teaching you how to do it, just giving you specifics. We're making the assumption you already understand the record keeping. If you don't, I provided you information on the front on the JCAR, talks about it, and then I showed you how to go on Osha.gov website and go to the training material, and they have great topics on how to do record keeping. Osha.gov is an amazing resource. All right. Remember, post your questions in the chat window, and then there are moderators and subject matter experts. Eric and Pat will address your questions. So you must know the difference between recordable and reportable. Recordable are incidences that you fill out in the OSHA 300 log. Reportable incidences are when you must call Illinois OSHA. We're going to cover those two differences. This is an overview. This presentation will serve as an overview for Illinois OSHA COVID record-keeping requirements only. Specific questions about the standards or what incidences are or are not recordable should be posted in the chat window or email your questions to dolsafety@illinois.gov. We will start with the COVID-specific requirements and then circle back to just a general overview of what record keeping is. I addressed in the beginning of this webinar where and how to find Illinois OSHA laws and regulations. Remember the Occupational Safety and Health Act 820, ILCS, and JCAR Title 56, Chapter 1, Part 350. Please sign up for future webinars, which will go into more depth on the Illinois OSHA record keeping and reporting requirements. I need to stress that COVID-19 is a recordable illness if it's work-related and one or more of the general recording criteria apply. We're going to cover that. And I need to stress this as well. An isolation order without a diagnosis is not recordable or reportable unless it is a confirmed case by healthcare provider, licensed healthcare provider. It is not recordable or reportable. If you're a little confused about work-relatedness, we're going to cover that next. So if, after a reasonable and good faith inquiry, the employer cannot determine if an exposure at the workplace played a casual role with respect to a particular case of COVID-19, the employer does not need to record that particular COVID-19 illness for that employee. So again, a reasonable and good faith inquiry. What this means is the employer shall investigate to determine how the employer contracted COVID-19 illness and is there a likelihood they contracted it at work. If yes, and it meets one or more of the general recording criteria, then you as an employer must record the event on your OSHA 300 log. If you cannot determine through an investigation how the employer contracted 19, then you do not need to record the case. What's an employee? Who are covered employees? So if you pay them, they're your employee. If they're volunteers, that's where it gets a little questionable, but we're going to cover that as well. So a volunteer, there's different definitions on how what meets a volunteer, and it's based on the level of oversight that you have over that volunteer on whether or not you need to record them or report for them. So there are two U.S. Supreme Court cases, Natural Mutual Insurance Company versus Darden and the Community for Creative Nonviolence versus Reed. We often refer to them as the Darden and Reed. See, they lay out the criteria to be considered in determining whether there's an employee-employer relationship. Illinois OSHA uses the listed criteria to make determinations in cases where the employers are unsure. So the employee-employer relationship is heavily fact-based. Therefore, each situation is evaluated individually on a case-by-case basis. Following is a partial list of jobs which utilize volunteers in the same work environment with paid employees who are protected by OSHA or Illinois OSHA regulations. So volunteer firefighters, emergency medical technicians, candy stripers, and other hospital volunteers, students training in the workplace, lifeguards, geriatric care volunteers. Those are examples of volunteers that would typically be covered underneath Illinois OSHA if they're working in a governmental facility. So let's talk about what it means to be a volunteer. So this is how I've described it in the past. A church group volunteers to pick up trash at a forest preserve. So the volunteer church group brings all the tools and they provide their own leadership. The forest preserve supervisory, their duties end once they assign the church group an area. So in this scenario, the church group are volunteers, and the forest preserve does not need to report or record any accidents of the group. So the church group shows up with their own tools, their own leadership. They know what to do. All they're given is an area, much like, so they're told you are going to pick up this area. They are not considered employees, but volunteers. Now let's say the same forest preserve and a different church group. This church group relies on the forest preserve to provide the tools, outlines when and how the trash will be collected, and the forest preserve provides the leadership. Now these volunteers are employees because of that employer-employee relationship. All right, moving on. There's going to be some questions on that, so I'm sure we'll circle back. All right, so here's that 1% we talked about earlier. Organizations and rules. All public employees must maintain an OSHA log, no matter the size. Again, 820 ILCS 219, Section 60, Subpart A, requires public employees to maintain OSHA 300 logs. 56 ILCS 350.250 outlines how OSHA logs will be maintained. We're going to cover next the 5 steps to determine if you should record an incident. So these are the 5 steps. Did the employer experience an injury or illness? Is the injury or illness work-related? Is the injury or illness a new case? Does the injury or illness meet the general recording criteria? And then step 5 is based on your answers to the first 4, do you record or not to record? We will touch on each of the topics, but we'll try to relate it back to the COVID to answer any questions. So what is an injury or illness? Illinois OSHA Field Operating Manual, or the FOM, defines the injury or illness as listed on the slide. So it includes cases such as, but not limited to, cuts, fractures, sprains, amputations. Illnesses include both acute and chronic illnesses, but are not limited to skin diseases, respiratory disorders, or poisonings. So the question I have for the group is COVID-19 a respiratory disorder? And the answer is yes. So it would need to be recorded. If it meets the other 4 criteria. Step 2, ask the question, is the injury or illness work-related? We're going to cover exactly what that means. An injury or illness is work-related if an event or exposure in the work environment either caused or contributed to the resulting condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing illness or injury or illness. Work-relatedness is presumed for injury or illnesses resulting from events or exposures in the work environment unless an exception applies. So these are the exceptions we spoke about earlier on this slide, unless exceptions specifically apply, where there are 10 specific exceptions, and we're going to cover those. If the incident leading to the injury or illness does not meet these 10 exceptions, then the injury or illness must be considered work-related. Hey, Pat, your camera's on. I don't know if you want it on or not. All right, the 5 listed on the slide are discernible cause, a member of the general public, solely from non-work-related events or exposures, yet they surface at work, solely from volunteer participation in fitness activities, eating or drinking personal supplies. We're going to cover what is discernible cause. Federal OSHA has already expanded on what this means in a standard interpretation dated November 19th, 2002 to Mr. Filner. Under the record-keeping rule, an injury or illness is presumed work-related if and only if an event or exposure in the work environment is a discernible cause of the injury, illness, or a significant aggravation to a pre-existing condition. The work event or exposure need only be one of a discernible cause. It need not be the sole or predominant cause. So if you cannot discern if it happened at work, then it's not recordable, though. So then it would go down, can you through contact tracing determine if the employee got sick at work due to COVID, then it would be recordable. And we're going to cover those different, we're going to get into more detail on that in a second. Scenario, an employees ride share to work on a volunteer basis. One employee in the ride share group, member volunteer basis to and from work, one of the group contracts COVID-19, and the others in the group also test positive. Are these employees COVID-19 illness, is that recordable? So they're on their way to and from work in a private vehicle and on a volunteer basis ride sharing. Then the answer would be no. It is not recordable. 6 through 9 of additional not work-related exceptions. Outside of normal work hours while on establishment's property performing personal task. Number 6, solely the result of self-inflicted motor vehicle accidents in a personal vehicle or in the park or on a parking lot or company access road while commuting, and the common cold and flu. So we're going to go back to this personal task outside of employees assigned work hours. There's a case scenario. So a worker was using his personal table saw in a maintenance bay on the employer's property during normal duty hours to perform personal tasks. The employee sustained an amputation injury. Is this work-related? Yes, because it happened during assigned working hours. Even though it was his own, he was doing personal tasks, it was his own equipment, but he was on the property and he was getting paid for that time because it was during normal work hours, assigned working hours. So yes, that would be recordable. Solely the result of personal grooming or self-inflicted. And then the motor vehicle accident while not traveling for official business in company parking lot or access road while commuting to and from work. Case scenario on that one would be Illinois OSHA inspectors traveling to conduct an inspection in his personal vehicle while en route and no personal detours, gets into an auto accident and is injured. Is this work-related? Yes, because even though he's in his personal vehicle, he's on company time performing company business. An OSHA now let's say the same OSHA inspector is traveling home after work in his personal vehicle and gets into an accident. Is this work-related? No. So we talked earlier about the common cold or flu is not work-related, even if contracted at work. Yet, other contagious diseases are recordable if contracted at work. You can see that list. Tuberculosis, bronchitis, hepatitis A, or the plague are considered work-related if the employee is infected at work. That's not a comprehensive list. That's just examples, such as. And the COVID is also one of those, such as. There's one more. Not work-related. It's the last one, mental illness. The final exception is mental illness unless an employee provides the employer with a licensed healthcare professional's opinion that the mental illness is work-related. But the employee has to opt in to that. So we've covered two of the steps. Once you've determined the employee has sustained an injury or illness, next you determined if the injury or illness was work-related. Now you get to decide if the injury or illness is a new case. Determine a new case. For reoccurrences, for occupational illnesses in which the sign or symptoms reoccur or continue in the absence of an exposure in the workplace, the case must only be recorded once. Examples of that would be occupational cancers, asbestosis, or siliconosis. So that's for a reoccurrence. A new case would be an episode of occupational asthma. So that's a background underlying condition that is aggravated at work. So the incident must be treated as a new case because the episode or reoccurrence was caused by an event or exposure in the workplace. And then advice of a healthcare professional. The employer must follow the licensed healthcare professional's recommendations about whether the new case is new or reoccurrence. The employer may seek a second or third medical opinion. So you need to decide if it's a new case or if it's a pre-existing condition that's just a reoccurrence. If it's a new case, you have to document it. If it's a reoccurrence, you do not have to document it. Moving on. So now you've determined if there was an injury or illness, you determined if it was work-related, and then you determined if it's a new case. Now, the big one is, does it meet the general criteria or application to specific cases? So we're going to focus on this, and we're going to try to tie it back into COVID. So if it's recordable if it results in any of the following: death, days away from work, restricted job activities, transfers to another job, medical treatment beyond first aid, loss of consciousness, diagnosis by a physician or other licensed healthcare provider. The 7 items listed on the slide are true. If the 7 items listed on the slide are true, then as an employer, you must record the incident. A significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, even if it does not result in death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfers, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness must be recorded. Remember, to be recordable, it must have occurred at work or as a result of work. Just because you were sent home doesn't mean it's recordable or reportable. If you were told to isolate due to contact with someone who had COVID-19, you are not confirmed to have COVID and were not confirmed to have COVID-19, then it's just working remote or using sick time. If you are told to work from home due to a positive COVID diagnosis from a licensed healthcare professional that was contracted at work, then you are on restricted activities and not transferred. So again, if you've been positively diagnosed, then you can say you got sick from work, and then it is a restricted work, not transferred, or days away from work. If a licensed healthcare professional diagnoses someone with COVID-19, this meets the criteria above. Again, isolation without diagnosis is not recordable. Once we've outlined the 4 steps required for an incident to be recordable and provided we have outlined the 4 steps required for an incident to be recordable and provided examples. If you have answered yes to each of the 4 steps, then you need to record it in the OSHA 300 log. If you answered no at any of those 4 steps, then you do not need to record it. Remember, there is no penalties for documenting when you don't have to. However, there are potential penalties for not recording when you should have. There are many more recording requirements, yet these are outside the COVID-19 relatedness. Illinois OSHA will put together another OSHA 300 brief that will go into more detail later. Next, I will cover the Hipaa aspect of recording and reporting with regards to COVID-19. I'll give you a second to read that slide, but please note that I added 301 into the standard language due to 301 forms being addressed in the same context in a later standard. So I cut that 1904 35B 2-4 directly out of standard, but I added that 301 in there because it's mentioned in a later standard. So may I remove the names of employees or other information from OSHA 300 301 logs before I give copies to employees, former employees, or employee representatives? Now let's circle back to that real quick. You must provide these forms. If employees or former employees or employee representatives ask for these forms, you have to provide it. If not, you're violating Illinois OSHA and federal OSHA law. And the answer is no. You cannot take their names off or take off, you can't leave information off the forms that you give to them. But later on, there are situations where you can. So under these specific situations are the only ones you can. Again, 35B states you may not remove names or other information from the 300 logs. However, 29B states you can, but only for the situations listed. Injury or illness to an intimate part of the body or the reproductive system. A sexual assault, mental illness, HIV infection, hepatitis B, or tuberculosis, needle stick injuries, or cuts from sharp objects that are contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material. So may I classify any other types of injury or illnesses as a privacy concern case? Yes, but there's only one. And that only other one is COVID-19. It's the only other injury or illness you may admit information to due to privacy concerns. And that's the newest edition that came out in the from federal OSHA. The latest directives they just give. So this standard interpretation restates what we discussed on the last slide. Hipaa does not regulate, HIPAA does not come into play when we talk about OSHA 300 logs and reporting, unless it meets the 29B6 standard. These items here are the only ones that you can leave off. The only reasons you can leave off in addition to COVID. Everything else has to be documented. All right, so we have completed the COVID-19 record keeping. Now I'm going to pause my microphone and let Sunshine, Eric, and Pat address some questions that have been coming in the chat window. Thank you.
First one, we have one here. We had an employee test positive for COVID. Until this time, we've never had or shown any symptoms of positive tests in my organization. What does the first one not count, but following ones do? It kind of depends. an organization should be able to provide documentation of some type of due diligence that we found where the first individual received their uh, COVID. Maybe it was because their spouse works in healthcare. That would be a hint. And then that to everybody else, the first one wouldn't, the following ones would. In some cases, it's a case by case scenario with COVID and the reporting guidelines. As long as an organization does their due diligence, you'll be fine.
Okay, thanks, Pat. I'll kind of go through the questions here and catch up with everyone. Jeremy, thanks for your question. College students working for a government agency, part of a 4-credit course. Generally, that appears that they would be considered employees. The Act says an employee is a person in the service of one of the following entities. So that can be by appointment or contract or by hire. It doesn't even have to be in writing. So generally, based on your question, that sounds like that would be an employee. We are going to talk about record-keeping logs. If you are a state or local government entity, you may have to upload your OSHA 300 summary to federal OSHA, and we will talk about that as well. Some employees do and some employees don't, based on how many employees they have and what industry they work in. The what if from Scott about an employee off the clock, but they're using tools at work. The question again would be, is that employee performing something in the service of that government unit, or are they doing a personal project? So regardless if they're technically clocked in or out, are they doing something for the employer or are they doing something for themselves? That would be where you'd want to look at if it's work related or not. Hello, Melody, tripping off the curb while walking to their car. There is an OSHA letter of interpretation that says generally parking facilities are not considered part of an employer's premises for the purposes of OSHA record keeping. Of course, there's always situations that could be different. For instance, if a maintenance crew is working on maintaining the parking lot and there's an injury in that they'd be in the service of the employer to repair or maintain that parking lot. So not always, but most likely it's not work related.
To add to that, Eric, in some cases that workers' comp may pay for that, but that's not still a recordable for Illinois OSHA.
Sure, yeah. Work comp determinations and OSHA recordable determinations can be completely different. If there's a presumptive law out there for workers' compensation that says it's presumed to be work-related, that has nothing to do with the OSHA work-relatedness. From Ron, since employees' movements can't be restricted outside of work, how can we make a reasonable determination it was caused at work? That's part of your inquiry. You have to take the totality of the circumstances. If you have strict enforcement and good practices in the facility, and then the community positivity rate is 20%, and for instance, Bob that has COVID has been following the rules in the workplace, but he's going to the bar, on the weekends, that could be part of your determination to state that we believe it's more likely than not that it didn't happen. So the burden we're looking for is more likely than not, and that equals 51% in a numbers game that it either did or didn't happen at work.
In regards to requiring employees to take sick leave or just straight pay because their daughter was off sick, that is not an OSHA issue. I can't discuss that. That's an internal policy issue with your organization.
Right. For Mike, how will compliance be determined if the employer doesn't think an employee's case is reportable, but Illinois OSHA later believes it should have been reported? We're going to look for good faith case-by-case determinations. So we are going to look at the methods that you used to determine that. If you simply say that it's impossible that anyone could get COVID in our facility, that's not a good faith effort. But if you can show that you have policies in place, you're enforcing those policies, yet outside, of course, you have no control over that. That's part of that determination. So we're going to look at what you've done as employer to make a good faith inquiry. What does the OSHA 300 log look like? Where can that be accessed? If you email us at dol.safety@illinois.gov, we'll send you a link to the OSHA record keeping PDF, and it's kind of a paint by numbers instructional manual as well. So feel free to do that, and we can send that to you, or you can just Google the OSHA record keeping forms from the federal OSHA website, and it's pretty easy to find. Yes,
Eric, I'll cover that real quick.
Okay,
we talked about going to OSHA.gov, right? So I'm on OSHA.gov here. Everybody can see that. So we can go to topics, right? And they have what you're looking for. Okay, so we'll go down here to e-tools. You're not supposed to do live demonstrations, right? But you have e-tools. You can find record keeping in here that helps you, right? Expert advice on record keeping, right? Checklists, and everything is here for you. OSHA.gov, spend a little time on here, and you can get the information you're looking for. Okay, I'm sorry, Eric.
No problem.
We have one question that's kind of unique. If the employee's working off the clock and working in, I assume, a shop and gets injured, is that a recordable? Well, if the employee's off the clock but is doing work that's associated with the organization, yes, it would be recordable. If the employee's off the clock and working on his own car or own vehicle in the shop, then it would not be.
Okay. Some individuals that are quarantined by a local health department due to being a close contact. So one of the recording criteria is that there's a positive COVID test. So if they're quarantined by the health department, they're not COVID positive. So that would not be reportable because they don't have COVID. We wouldn't record that. If an employee reports that they tested positive, but it's not work-related, we don't need to note it at all, question mark. If it's not work-related, no, it's not recordable. If you do want to put a note in their file, of course, for contact tracing and to ensure that that person doesn't transmit it in your workplace, obviously you do need to be aware of it and cognizant of it. But if it's not work-related, it does not need to be recorded. And I think that catches us up.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks, panelists. We're going to move on then. Get this slide out of the way. And I found that buzzing noise, and I got rid of that, so sorry about that in the background. All right, moving on. The next topic will be the Illinois OSHA COVID-19 reporting requirements. Post your questions in the chat window, and one of our subject matter expert and panelists will get back to you at the end of it. So you must know the difference again between reportable and recordable. Covered again. Recordable is something you put on the OSHA 300 log. Reportable is something you have to call us about. So the overview. This presentation will serve as an overview for Illinois OSHA COVID reporting requirements only. Specific questions on standards or what incidents are or are not reportable should be posted in the chat window or email your question to dolsafety@illinois.gov. We will start with COVID-specific requirements and circle back to the general reporting requirements overview. Report all work-related facilities to Illinois, all work-related fatalities to Illinois OSHA within 8 hours and all other recordable injuries and illnesses within 24 hours, or as soon as you discover the incident. I will cover what reportable incidences are shortly. The only exception to work-relatedness are heart attacks that occur at work. These must be reported to Illinois OSHA, and an enforcement manager will determine work-relatedness. The numbers you need to call are here on the screen. This is manned 24/7. So, reporting a fatality, again, within 8 hours or as soon as you discover. But if you don't discover the death until after 30 days from the incident, you do not need to report it. Any COVID-19 fatality that occurs after 30 days of a work-related exposure does not need to be reported to Illinois OSHA. Any other COVID-19 related fatality that is work-related must be reported to Illinois OSHA. Examples: employee was exposed at work and contracted COVID-19, was okay, but then they went into respiratory failure after 21 days and passed away after 31. Does this fatality need to be reported to Illinois OSHA? No. The number listed is manned 24/7, and someone will collect background information. Even if you don't know all the information, it's best to contact us and we'll get back to you. As soon as you know what happened and you have the basic 5 W's, give us a call, report the information, and then we will receive the report and give you a call back. It's better to report than not to have reported at all. All right, it's better to report and not needed to than not to have reported at all. Just give us a call. Inpatient hospitalizations. So these are the other recordable incidences. All inpatient hospitalizations, amputation, or loss of an eye. Those 3 that are listed down below. If an employee, these 3 here. If an employee sustains an injury or requiring inpatient hospitalization or results in an amputation or loss of an eye, you need to contact Illinois OSHA within 24 hours or as soon as you discover it. And that's the same number that you would call for an hospitalization, amputation, loss of an eye, this number right here. We're going to go ahead and just circle that again. This number right here. All right. Any COVID-19 related hospitalization admission after 24 hours of exposure does not need to be reported. So that's a little odd because it could take up to 3 to 4 days for the symptoms to appear, and then they would be administered to the hospital. But if you can show that exposure happened greater than a 24-hour period, then that admission to the hospital for COVID relatedness does not have to be reported. Example: an employee was exposed at work and contracted COVID-19, but was okay, then went into respiratory failure after 21 days, and he checked into a hospital for treatment. Does this case need to be reported? Reported to Illinois OSHA? The answer is no. So the same reporting method as stated earlier, 217-782-7860. Someone will answer your call and collect your information. We're going to discuss inpatient hospitalization next. And remember, no harm in reporting potential citations for not reporting. So there's no harm for reporting something you didn't have to, but there are potential citations for not reporting. Inpatient hospitalization. So a formal admission does not require an overnight stay or defined by any length of time. The hospital or clinic will determine the admittance, not the employer. So it's the hospital or the clinic will determine the type of admittance, not the employer. They determine if it's inpatient or outpatient. Let's go back to this one more time. Now, just because you go to the hospital doesn't mean it's automatically reportable. So you could go to the hospital and they can give you first aid, and then you're released, and that is not reportable because it was still first aid. But again, that's not your determination as an employer, that's the hospital's determination. All right, electronic reporting. A 300A data must be submitted electronically to Illinois OSHA via the following address. Employees must not only keep the records on site and available for employees, employee reps, but also for government agencies. But that also some agencies have to, some government bodies have to submit the 300A electronically to a federal OSHA website. Now, not every government body does. We're going to cover that next. And this system is ran by federal OSHA, not by us. We don't have control over it, nor are we administrators. So this is the breakdown of who needs and who does not need to electronically submit their OSHA 300As. So employers or establishments with 250 or more employees. So an establishment is not the same as an employer. So an establishment would be a particular work site or work environment where all the employers come in. So if you have more than 250 or more employees at that establishment, then you would have to submit. Or if you fall within these four requirements here, if you have between 20 and 249 employees. So highway, streets, and bridge construction, local fire protection districts or fire departments, state and local government nursing and residential care facilities have to submit if you have greater than 20 employees. Water and sewer treatment facilities have to submit if you have between 20 and 249 employees. An example, so Village of Nebo has 2 full-time employees working at a village at a public works crew. Would the Village of Nebo need to submit an OSHA 300A form electronically? No, they do not. No, they don't need to submit it, but they need to keep it. So examples of greater than 20 employees would be highway and street and bridge, IDOT, city, like the city of Springfield, their public works department would need to submit 300A forms electronically. A city street and alley department, township districts, county highway departments if they have more than 20 employees. Local fire protection districts if they have more than 20 employees. A city fire department, either paid or volunteers, need to submit if they have more than 20 employees. State and local nursing home residential care facilities, all government-owned facilities within the state. Water and sewer treatment plants, government-owned and ran drinking water supply and or sewage treatment facilities if you have more than 20 employees. All right, moving on. That is the COVID-19 reporting requirements. We're going to pause now and open it up to questions. So, Pat, Eric, if you guys got some questions, I'm going to mute my mic and let you go for it. I'm going to step out for a second, and I'm going to check back in whenever I get back.
Okay. Thanks, Hap. Pat's been doing a great job answering some questions in the chat. So let's take this one. If someone is at is home-based and has a positive COVID test, it's been determined they got it at work, are those days considered days away from work for reporting purposes? So it could be days away from work. If they're sick and they're not working at all and they have COVID, then that could be days away from work. If they have COVID and they just, oh, I can't taste my coffee anymore, and they can continue to work, and they can do everything that they can do at work. They can do at home. They can work remotely. Then that might not be anything at all. There's no restrictions. They just can't come to the office, but they can do everything that they do at work at home. Or maybe they can't do everything that they do at work at home. That could be considered a restriction. So if they're completely sick, not working, days away, if they can do everything they can do at work at home, that could be no restriction. Or if they have some restrictions because they can't come to work, that could be restricted. So it's really dependent on the situation and what they can do. Let's see here.
Do community colleges have to submit 300A forms electronically? I'll read them to you. Yes, it depends on which division or what's in it. Depends on how you fill out your 300As. You shouldn't just have one 300A for an entire community college. Different divisions within that would be required. We can get into it more. Give us a call.
Yeah, if you're having trouble determining record keeping, we want to keep records at the establishment level. And it's not, in some instances, it's not easy to define what that is. So like Pat said, give us a call, give us an email, and we can help you with your OSHA 300 records. Positive results acquired at work are recordable, but only reportable if they are hospitalized within 24 hours of exposure. So Stephen has a good point out there. How can you exactly determine that they were hospitalized within 24 hours of exposure? Not necessarily an easy thing to do, and it might take you quite some time to actually figure that out if you figure it out at all. So that's why we say it's always better to report than not report at all. And if it turns out that it wasn't actually reportable, there's no harm there. But if you didn't report, then there could be a citation there. And again, the reportable, like we've covered, there's many reasons why it could be reportable. Hospitalization or a fatality, those would be reportables. And the hospitalization, like Hap said, it's going to be an admission to the hospital. Marion says we used to report, but no longer have 250 employees. So for your reportable, for electronic reporting, you need to calculate your average number of employees who worked there during the year. And those OSHA record keeping forms on osha.gov has an optional how to fill out this summary page, and it tells you exactly how to do that. So that's a very helpful document if you can download that. And if you can't find it, of course, get in touch with us and we can send it directly to you.
Hey, Eric.
Stephen's talking. Go ahead.
One more thing. If you have an organization with 250 employees, but they are in different establishments, and each establishment is less than 250 employees, then you don't have to report. An example, if I was a school district, I had 4 elementaries, I had a middle school and a high school, and I have 550 employees, but less than 250 at each site, I don't have to report.
Yeah, that's a great point, Pat. And, we can help you work through these establishment determinations. Sometimes it gets a little tricky, but we can definitely help you out with that.
So we're going to do another, if there's a need, and it looks like there's a need, we're going to do a more in-depth OSHA 300 log, recordable and reportable, that goes into more depth and covers these questions. The purpose of this was just to cover these cover these topics as they relate to COVID. So if you'd like to have at the end of the WebEx, there's going to be a questionnaire, and if you want to fill that out and put down topics that you would like us to cover, that'll kind of guide me on what topics I need to build training for. Are we good on questions, guys?
Yeah, I put direct link in the chat to the OSHA record keeping forms page. So that
Great. Thanks, Eric.
would be very helpful.
Got a new one here. If any full-time employee, if an employee falls or cuts themselves badly while on their lunch, must I report it on an OSHA 300 log? If they cut it while they're making their own food, no. If they cut it while we're doing a potluck, yes.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Pat. That's a good
Yep.
point. We have more?
We actually do.
Okay.
How do I determine establishment versus employer? We are a school district with 4 school buildings. Each school is considered an establishment. That is correct. You would also have an establishment for if you have school buses, if you run the transportation for the schools, transportation would be its own establishment. If you had a large facility management team that maybe oversees 3 or 4, those would also be that facility management would also be a separate establishment within the organization. Does COVID record keeping on an OSHA 300 only apply to public companies? No, it is actually applies to private sector too. Would a small municipal employing 20 plus employees and operating a water and sewer utility would have to electronically for all employees or just for those OSHA 300 recordable for the utility workers? It would be, if you separated the OSHA logs out by department, then you would not have to. If you had a lump sum for public works and it was over 20, then you would. Schools or school districts with fewer than 250 employees are exempt from reporting. Depends on if school districts, for a school, yes. You may, if you have transportation got taken off, right, Hap?
So transportation's taken off, but it's street here. Let's go back. It is this.
No, it wouldn't. They wouldn't have to
highway,
report.
street, and bridge construction.
Streets came on, but transportation came off. So you wouldn't have to. You're correct.
Okay, so I think we're going to move on and make sure we stay within the timelines and the time frame here. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. We're going to, again, we can't answer all the questions that are coming in, but we're going to try to answer as many as we can. And then if you have specifics, again, we encourage you to email DOL safety at illinois.gov. The site's listed there. I can't speak. So DOL safety at illinois.gov. Email your questions there. We'll address them and send them back.
Actually, Hap, I got one more.
Yep, go ahead, Pat.
This deals with temporary workers and COVID. Does it go on the employer or OSHA log, or does it go on the labor companies? And that really boils down to who has day-to-day supervision. It's very rare, but you hire a temporary labor through an agency or so forth, and those employees show up, and your staff tells them what to do. That would go on your OSHA log. If the temp service had an employee out in your facility, giving them directions on what to do, as a supervisor, then it would go on the temp services OSHA log.
All right, thanks, Pat. All right, looks like some people are getting their questions answered in the chat window directly as well. So thanks, panelists, for that as well. So we're going to move on. Outstanding points, Pat and Eric. You guys are, I'm sure, glad to have you on the line here to answer these questions. All right, moving on now. Now we're going to cover good faith efforts to meet Illinois OSHA annual requirements. So remember, post your questions in the chat window. So federal OSHA published several enforcement directives dealing with enforcement of OSHA standards in light of the pandemic. The two listed are the most recent and current as of today, 16 December 2020. Illinois OSHA used these documents to draft our own compliance directive, ensuring government employers were afforded the same benefit as the private sector employers. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, Illinois OSHA understands that some employers may face difficulties complying with OSHA standards due to the ongoing health emergency. Widespread business closures, restrictions on travel, limitations on group size, facility visitor prohibitions, and stay-at-home or shelter-in-place requirements may limit the availability of employers, consultants, or contractors who normally provide training, auditing, equipment inspections, testing, and other essential safety and industrial hygiene services. Businesses, closures, and other restrictions and limitations may also preclude employee participation in training, even when trainers are available. In other situations, access to medical testing facilities may be limited or suspended. These difficulties do not mean you will not get inspected. So just because you're having an issue and just because it's difficult doesn't mean that our inspectors are still not going to go out and knock on your door. We understand that. But the COSHOs, or the compliant safety and health officers, will evaluate whether the employer made good faith efforts to comply with applicable OSHA standards, and in situations where compliance was not possible, to ensure the employers were not exposed to health hazards from tasks, processes, or equipment for which they were not prepared or trained. So have you, as the employer, demonstrated a history of completing the requirements in the past, but unable to recently due to COVID-19 restrictions? This goes a long way towards helping the COSHO and the enforcement managers determine if good faith has been met. Where the employer cannot demonstrate any efforts to comply, a citation may be issued under existing enforcement policy. So COSHO is going to go out, perform an inspection. He's going to review what the employer has and has not done, what the employer has been able to do. And we're going to look at the practices and the temporary interim measures that you have put in place to protect your employees because you couldn't get a trainer in there or you couldn't get that yearly audit done. And we're going to look at that and we're going to understand that as COSHOs and as Illinois OSHA. But what we will not accept is, we couldn't because COVID. No, you as an employer have the responsibility to protect your employees from all hazards. Good faith process. It's not a static definition. It's not a one-size-fits-all. But the COSHOs will evaluate whether the employer thoroughly explored all options to comply with applicable standards. Examples would be the use of virtual training or remote communication strategies. COSHOs shall also consider any interim alternative protections implemented or provided to protect employees, such as engineering or administrative controls. Those are always the preferred method anyways. PPE is the last method. Engineering and administrative controls are the preferred. And whether the employer took steps to reschedule the required annual activity as soon as possible. In instances where the employer is unable to comply with Illinois OSHA mandated training, audit, assessments, inspections, or testing requirements, the employer should document, and document. You need to provide these documents to COSHOs showing attempts to meet the applicable requirements. COSHOs and enforcement managers will review collected documentation to aid in the enforcement discretion. So as you as the employer, have you done everything you can do? Have you exhausted all avenues of training? All avenues of training. So we're looking now for, I must have closed it. I was going to take you to the OSHA.gov website. Here it is. OSHA.gov. Go to the top, go to Help and Resources. Let's go down here to Training. Let's go down here to, if you don't know what resources you need to do, Training Requirements by in Resources. This tells you the training requirements by the standard, PDF document. If any of you guys are familiar with the EPA and they have their list of lists, this is similar to that. It talks about, this will list every training requirement by topic you need to have. It breaks it down. You need to have get make sure that you, when it opens up, that you have went through and completed those requirements. Now let's talk about if it's a yearly requirement and it opens up and you do it every April and it's March and you still haven't been able to do it, but now the restrictions are listed in March and things are flowing a little bit better and we're a little closer back to normal. Do you go ahead and do those requirements for 2020 in March and then do it again in April? Well, that wouldn't make sense. So why don't you, as long as the interim protection measures are in place and you're still protecting your employees, you can hold off until April. Is there a cutoff? Is there a timeline? Is there a hard date? No, because everything's industry specific and it's situational based. You can get extra time. So there are several options for an employer to request additional days to complete abatement. If you do get a citation, there are methods and avenues in place to extend when you have to complete the abatement. An employer may file a petition to modification of abatement date or a PMA when it has made a good faith effort to comply with abatement requirements, but such abatement has not been completed due to circumstances beyond their control. So just because you get a citation doesn't mean you have to fix it right away. It means that you have to put interim measures in place to protect your employees, and then we will work on long-term solutions. The PMA must be in writing prior to the original abatement due date. So if we give you 30 days to fix the problem, and day 31 you say, "Oh, but I couldn't fix it because we're going to have some problems." You need to start working on it ahead of time and figure out if you're going to need additional time. An employee may request an informal conference to request additional time or ask for the citation to be dismissed for our long-term abatement plan. And that will, and if you get we're going to cover all of that information in the next couple slides, not in the next presentation. Communication is the key. Working with your inspector and the enforcement manager is the key to finding feasible abatement and identify the hazards. So work with your inspector, and we'll come up with a plan to help you out. But you have to work with us. You can't just ignore us. So there's not one COVID standard that applies. These are the COVID standards that apply to the industries, to the government bodies. Bloodborne pathogen standard does not apply to COVID-19, and then here's why. Bloodborne pathogen standard applies to occupational exposure to human blood or other potentially infectious material that does not include respiratory secretions that may contain SARS-CoV-2, unless blood is visibly present in the saliva secretions. However, the provisions of the standard offer a nice framework that may help control some of the sources of the virus, including exposure to body fluids not covered by the standard. Citation guidance. These items that say could apply are the standards and requirements should be evaluated for elevated occupational exposure risk. This list is not exhaustive. Violations of OSHA standard cited from this list will typically be classified as serious. So the general duty clause. If deficiencies not addressed by Illinois OSHA standards or regulations are discovered in the employer's exposure, in the employer's preparedness for controlling occupational exposure for COVID-19, and there's guidance available, for example, the CDC or the Illinois Health Department, a potential general duty clause violation may be issued. The general duty clause must include these 4 required elements. The employer failed to keep the workplace free of a hazard to which employees of that employer were exposed. The hazard was recognized. The hazard was causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And there was a feasible and useful method to correct the hazard. Unless all 4 of these elements are observed and documented, the enforcement manager could issue a hazard alert letter recommending the implementation of protective measures that address COVID-19 hazards. For example, if there's no evidence that an employee was potentially exposed to the virus in the workplace, then the first element was not met and you could not be issued a general duty clause. We spoke earlier about the 1%. So we don't issue 5A1, we issue Section 20B, the general duty clause for Illinois OSHA. That's one of that 1% we talked about. So let's go back to this. So 1, the four steps. The employer failed to keep the workplace free of hazards to which the employee and the employer were exposed. So the CDC, the Illinois Health Department, has put out guidance. If you're ignoring that guidance, you are potentially in violation of step 1 because you failed to keep the workplace free of hazards which the employee and employer were potentially exposed. Was the hazard recognized? Yes, it is, because the CDC and the Illinois Health Department have talked about it. Everybody knows about it. The hazard was caused or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. COVID-19 does likely cause death or serious physical harm. Now this is where it gets questionable. Was there a feasible and useful method to correct the hazard? So that's where it becomes more difficult, and that's where the conversations need to happen, and that's where we need to go through and look at industry-specific recommendations. Illinois OSHA.gov has great resources on COVID-19 and broken down by industry specifics. Illinois Department of Public Health has great resources broken down by industry specifics. So we will look at all those resources to make that determination on that 4th step. Moving on. That completes the good faith efforts during the COVID-19. Right now, we're going to pause and take questions. Our subject matter experts are going to review the questions in the chat window. I'm going to step off, pause my phone, and listen.
Okay, looks like one right now. What was the directive number for good faith efforts in Illinois? I believe we're talking about Directive 20-3, and I believe that we will get that posted to the Illinois OSHA website.
As we spoke earlier, we're going to, this presentation is being recorded, and it's going to be put on our Illinois Department of Labor YouTube channel.
Okay, looks like we do have a couple questions that just popped in. Take a look here. Cynthia is asking, allowed to ask direct questions regarding where the employee believes they were exposed. That's more of an HR issue that you probably need to discuss. Generally, you know, it's common sense to make a work-related determination with COVID to have some idea of what the employee is doing outside of the workplace. You know, if they're going to the bar and the movie theaters and doing you know, risky behavior like that, then that could be a factor in your determination, but it's not something we really could opine on. And if they're the only person in the area to be positive, you know, that would be part of your inquiry and part of your determination to show justification that they likely acquired it outside of the workplace. The majority of employees are working at home. It's really just about the number of employees, and you're going to look at your payroll records for that. So it really doesn't matter where they work. It just you're going to look at the average number of employees for that calendar year, irregardless of where they actually work.
Even though they work from home.
Pertaining to OSHA 10 and 30 hours. Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, even though they work from home, they're assigned to an office for a public employer.
Right. OSHA 10 and 30 hour training during this time of COVID-19 classes be taken virtually. Illinois OSHA, we at this time, we don't provide OSHA 10 and 30 hour training. So if the training agency provides that, then that would be something that they would do. OSHA, you're never going to see a card from Illinois OSHA that says you are certified in this or that. That's a common misperception. There are a lot of people that claim that they were certified by OSHA, but that's likely not the case.
In regards to the 30-hour training, the resource center for your region has a written policy as to, and you can get case-by-case approval for remote learning for the 10 and 30-hour classes at this time.
And I think the region you're talking about, Pat, are you talking about Region 5 for Federal OSHA?
No, this would be their resource center for the training, depending on which one they're issuing the cards through.
Oh, okay. So is that it for questions then? Are we ready to move on?
What's this last? COVID work-related contracted illness has to be reported on the OSHA 300 log only if there isn't any hospitalizations, correct? That would be correct. Now we're done.
Okay, so we're going to move on now. The next topic we're going to cover is Illinois OSHA 101 inspections. So what it means to have an inspection. Remember, post your questions in the chat window. You can do that throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. So how we meet. We discussed earlier about the various ways we meet, the planned or random. This is just an overview again. So planned inspections are random inspections. Complaints are received and we investigate those complaints. Referrals received from a knowledgeable third party and then we investigate. Or immediate danger are investigated immediately. Fatalities or catastrophes the employer calls us about. Remember, planned inspections, those are based on a randomly generated list. Our inspectors are given a list based on their area, and then they select what time and when they inspect all the sites on that list. Complaints are received. We receive phone calls, emails, and then we will do follow-ups with the employer, or we will just show up. Referrals, if somebody gives us a call, lets us know, a fire department, typically fire departments give us a call about trenches because they drive by and they see it and they're trained and they know what's supposed to happen on trench activities. Immediate danger would also fall into that trench area. And fatalities and catastrophes. All right, moving on. The inspection process. So there's the partial and the comprehensive. When we show up to do a planned inspection, there's no notice given. We can do a partial or comprehensive. If it's a partial inspection would typically be if we receive a complaint, we're bound by only investigating that part of the complaint. Unless during our investigation, through interviews or walkarounds or information provided, we determine other serious hazards, then we will expand that investigation to include those complaints, or to include those items outside the complaint, original complaint. A comprehensive is an Illinois OSHA. We're there for everything. We will look and touch about everything. So if it's a PPI, program planned inspection, and your name is drawn out of the hat and we show up, we're looking at everything. Can you refuse entry to us? Yes, you can do that. We can show up and you can say, I don't have time for this, I need you to leave. You can do that. However, we can get a warrant and we will get a warrant and then we'll come back. You know, we're like everybody else, we're just people. So if we have to come back and spend the time to get a warrant, we might spend a little bit more time there. So the opening conferences is going to happen during the inspection process. The employees, we're going to lay out, we're going to show you as an inspector, we're going to show you everything that we have. We're going to show you our credentials. We're going to share the complaint with you. It's a sanitized version of the complaint, but we're going to show you why we're there to do the inspection. Employee reps are forwarded all the information as the employer, and if we need to, we'll do a second opening or a second closing to make sure the employees have all the information are included in the process. Notice and rights of the employer and the employees. We're going to inform you what your rights are, and we're going to tell you how to exercise those rights, and we're also going to gather basic information during an opening conference. That has to happen first before we conduct the inspection. So we have to kind of tell you why. We have to tell you why we're there. We have to tell you how we're going to perform our inspection and what we're looking for. Inspection process. We're going to review your documents. So after the opening conference, we're going to ask to see some documentation. And we're going to spend a little bit of time reviewing that documentation to get a handle on what that establishment does and doesn't do. If you don't have the documents at that time, you can get them to us later. But this will only slow down our inspection, and it'll cause our inspectors to spend more time on site to try to get a handle on what you're doing and it'll require us to interview more employees so that we can get a handle on what you're doing. So if you can get us those documents ahead of time, we can review those before we start our walk around, and it helps us out and it'll help you out too. Remember, if it's not in writing, it didn't exist. So it has to be documented. So this is, a lot of our inspections take place for fire protection districts and fire departments. So we're going to review the records, and we want to see if their SCBAs are current, what the PPE, the apparatus, equipment. So there's a list of things that they have to do, and we're going to ask to see those records. While we're walking around, we also may say, hey, I didn't know about this. Could you show me your test results on that, or show me your documentation you have on this? Once we request these documents, you're going to have a limited time to provide them to us. So we give you enough time to gather them, but we don't give you enough time to recreate them. If we've given you a timeline, that's a pretty hard timeline. And if you don't meet that timeline, then we're going to consider those documents not to exist. The inspection process, after we've done the opening, after we've done the records review, we're going to do a walk around, and we're going to look at the building, we're going to look at the site. The employer and the employee reps have the right to walk with us. So it's typical for inspectors to go out and have a caravan of people behind them. The things we're looking for is we're looking for clean and sanitary conditions, electrical hazards, safe working, walking and working surfaces, clear exit and exit paths. We look at the NFPA 101, make sure the chemicals are labeled, all HAZCOM, the hazard communication is in place. Are the flammable liquids stored in a proper place? Are they stored near an exit route? We're going to look for all your tools and equipment to make sure that they're up to code. Grinders are a big one with the tongue guards and the work rest. Are they in place? We're just looking for a safe environment. I typically, when I go out and do inspections, I tell the employers that I'm a third grader. I need you to give me the third grade tour. And much like a third grader, I'm going to have lots of questions, and I'm going to need you to explain it to me. But on that tour, you're responsible for my safety. So I don't go through doors first. I don't open compartments first. I let you open it, hand it to me, inspect it. And then much like that, like a third grader, I love scratch and sniff. But unlike a third grader, if it smells bad, that's where I like to dig in. If I'm looking at something and I'm asking some questions and you're answering the questions correctly and you're providing me with the right keywords, then I'm going to move on from that topic. But if you are unable to answer my questions, or if things just don't look right, I'm going to start scratching in until I find the reason why it doesn't look right and why it smells bad. I'm going to keep digging and digging and digging until I find the root cause. So we're there to walk around and touch everything. On a comprehensive. On a partial, we're going to focus our inspection on just what the complaint says, unless we identify things in the plain open view or during the employee interviews. And that's when we're going to start opening up the inspection and start asking more questions and asking for more documentation. So in the fire department, for the walk around on the apparatuses, there's a whole list of things that the departments have to test for and certify. The same applies for a water protection, for a water treatment facility. We're going to walk around that site. Where the employees go, we want to go. Or the equipment tested regularly. Is it safe for the employees to perform their task based on the equipment that's around them? During the walk around, our employees, if your employees use it, our inspectors want to look at it. I have our, but it should be your. If your employees use it, our inspectors want to look at it. Our inspectors want to touch it. Our inspectors want to ask your employees who are walking around with us how they use that equipment. Ask if they're knowledgeable on that equipment. We're going to ask key questions. And again, if we don't get the right answers, we're going to start digging in. Public Works, we're going to want to look at your tools, your machines, your overhead hoist, your cranes, your stationary and moving movable equipment, we're going to walk around the grounds. If your employees go there, then we want to go there too. If it's unsafe for us to go there, we're going to ask that you make it safe for us to walk through there. If you can't make it unsafe, then we'll document that, and then we'll have a conversation. Inspection process, the employees interviews. We have the right to privately interview any employee we want to. In the 820 ILCS section 219, I describe this as we can go anywhere, talk to anybody, and obtain any documentation we need to in the course of our investigation for safety. So if you try to hide something from us, or if you try to limit our ability to access that, we can not only get a warrant, but we can also get a subpoena so we can get that information delivered to us. Excuse me for a second. Oh, I've been talking this whole time. My microphone's been up in the air. Sorry about that. Do you feel safe at work? We're going to ask questions of the employees privately. Do you feel safe at work? What do you do for your trainings? What are your duties? We're going to ask a series of questions to make sure we get a handle on what's going on at that facility. After the inspection, so we're going to show up, we're going to tell you why we're there, we're going to provide you the information while we're there, we're going to tell you what we're looking for. We're going to give you all the information in the opening conference. We're going to review your records, then we're going to do a walk-around inspection. We're going to walk around your site, we're going to ask you to get things out for us to touch and inspect. We're going to ask questions, and then after that's all over, and it could be a multi-day process. It doesn't have to be an hour, doesn't have to be one day. It could be multiple days if need be. After that's all over, we're going to do a closing conference. And again, we're going to have that closing conference with the employees, with the employers. We're going to try to get together in the same room and have a conversation. And at that time, we're going to tell you what we saw. We're going to talk about parent violations and other issues found. We're going to answer your questions. We're going to talk about abatement methods. Excuse me again. And then before I leave the site, hopefully I'll have answered all your questions, or I will have collected your questions that I can get answers to. And after the closing conference, the inspector may reach out to you for additional information. After the inspection has been completed, after the inspector has gone through all of his notes and wrote up potential citations, those potential citations they're given to the enforcement manager, and then the enforcement manager makes the ultimate recommendation or makes the approval or disapproval on our citations. So whenever we create citations, we have to have the 5 W's to back it up, and we provide that to the enforcement manager who ultimately approves or disapproves our citations. At that case, they will get sent out to the highest ranking official in the certified mail, which we will gather that, and then we will attempt to email you with the email addresses provided to other parties involved who need to know the information, because we realize the highest ranking official may not be the one who has the knowledge to fix the problem. So let's say we go to Public Works Department. The highest ranking official would be the elected mayor. So he would get a certified copy to the mayor's office. But we realize that there is a lag in that. Sometimes the Public Works Director needs that information first or at the same time. So we're going to attempt to send out an email to the Public Works Director so he gets an email of the exact same packet that was certified mailed. Now that is not a requirement. That is something that we do as a favor, as a good faith effort to work with the employer, but it's not a requirement. So keep that in mind. And also write legibly whenever we ask for email addresses and contact information, because if we can't read the email address, we can't send it back out. Let's go back to here. I think I forgot to cover something. we talked about the no notice. It's against the law for us or anybody else to provide pre-notice for an inspection. If we're going out to do an inspection, we cannot give advance notice that we're coming unless under very specific circumstances, and those circumstances are fire protection districts. Typically, when we go to fire protection districts, they're not manned, and so we show up. So we give a 24-hour notice. And the same goes to if we receive a complaint and the complainant finds out that we're going to do an inspection of that facility, and that complainant lets his coworkers or the rest of the people in the business know we're coming to do the inspection, that's against the law as well. So we can't give advance notice, nor can anybody else let them know that we're coming to do the inspection. Documents received. Once you receive a citation, there's going to be it's a citation packet, and it lets you know what you have to do. If you just read that packet, it lays out what the next steps are, and it tells you the timelines. There are distinct timelines on when things have to happen. The packet could include one of the following: a no violation letter where we say, hey, you guys did good. We observed no violations. Could be a hazard alert letter. Those hazard alert letters are not citations, they're recommendations. But you're on notice saying you didn't meet you didn't meet the minimum requirements for a citation that we have to prove. However, there is an observed hazard there, so it would be wise of you to take care of it. Or you can get a citation. It can be other than serious, repeat, willful, criminal, or criminal willful. The criminal willful, our citations are not criminal. They're civil, but we can send up to law enforcement and to the state's attorney's office for a criminal case if it meets the definition of criminal willful, or it can be a combination of any of those. The inspection process. The employers have options and rights based on our citations. So once we receive notification that a certified copy has been delivered to the highest ranking official, the clock starts. That's why we try to send out an email. You have 15 working days to contest the citation. After that time, the citations are considered final. You can contest the citations in several ways. You can do an informal conference, which is a horse trading, a conversation between the employer and the employee rep have to be all together in the room, and Illinois OSHA, and it typically takes place with the enforcement manager, and you guys have a conversation. It's not a legal proceeding, it's just a conversation. Or you can go a formal contest, which is a legal proceeding. An administrative law judge, you get a lawyer, we get a lawyer, and we sit in the courtroom, and the lawyer will decide the outcome, and the judge will decide the outcome. Or you can accept the citations and start working on abatements. You don't have to wait for the official packet to be received before you can start making it better. Remember, I said during the closing conference, we'll let you know what we think we saw. And typically, we don't know exactly what the citations are, we can see a problem ahead of time, but then we don't really know until we sit and start digesting and looking at what your department or what your facility, your establishment, what it says it does and its SOPs, its training requirements, what it actually does based on what we observed in our walk around and our employee interviews, and in addition to that, what the documentation that you've provided. If those three line up, then you're good to go. But if there's a variation in between the two, if one pillar is higher or lower than the other, then that area in between there is problems. And that's where we will work with you to try to correct those, to get them all on the same line. And we don't typically know that until we come back to the office and spend some time reviewing that. So oftentimes an inspector will send out their recommendations to the employer saying, hey, this is what I'm sending up to my boss to review. Again, these are recommendations. Just because you receive an email from the inspector doesn't mean that that's what it's going to be. Remember, we spoke earlier that the enforcement manager has the ultimate authority to make the decision. We're providing to you our recommendations. And at that time, you can start. That's not when you have to contest. That's just a heads up on what what we as inspectors saw and what we recommend. Again, 15 working days to contest the citation. And that must be in writing. At that informal conference, you can also ask for, we spoke about that earlier in the last couple slides, that informal conference is a conversation, and you can also ask for a PMA during that time, an abatement extension, or you can ask for the citation to be dismissed because of X, Y, and Z. And that has to be done in writing within 15 days of the highest ranking official receiving the notice. Monetary penalties. Citations that we issue are civil and not criminal. The exception to that would be a willful actions resulting in a serious injury or fatality could be referred to criminal prosecution. Most of our citations do not have financial penalties associated with it. Our goal is not to take from municipalities, right? Our goal is to correct the hazard. So if you're working with us, if there's an open line of communication, and if this is not the first time we've been out there and saw this hazard, there typically will not be a financial penalty associated with the citation. However, if you ignore us, if we have to go back out there, if you say you fixed something and didn't, and we find out about it, there will be financial penalties associated with it. I shouldn't say will, but there more than likely will be financial penalties associated with the follow-on citations. We understand that there's a cost associated with correcting the hazards, and we understand that most of the places we go, they don't control the purse strings. But we also understand that the citations we issue need to get fixed, and so that is justification to get it fixed. We can't tell you how to fix it. We can give you recommendations. We can prove to you that there are feasible abatement methods, and we can tell you if the abatement met the standard or not. But what we can't do is we can't tell you how to fix it. So abatements, again, going on this, they're corrected during the inspection. That's an option if we're walking around and we see, if we see a bunch of extension cords that are taped up with electrical tape to fix a hazard, that doesn't meet the standard. That's not going to work for us. If you cut those up, or if you throw them in the trash can, if you get rid of them, that would be corrected during the inspection. Once issued, you will typically have 30 days to abate. Once the citation is issued and delivered to the highest ranking official, you will have 30 days to have the hazard corrected, unless you ask for an extension or if you protest it. If you need more time, work with your inspector and request an extension through a PMA or in that informal conference. We will continue to work with you and continue to provide you examples, and we will help you. Our inspectors are trained to not only identify the hazards, but also to work with employers to help them find the resources they need, not financial, but resources, training material, example documents to get them up to speed. Again, we can't tell you how to fix it. We can provide you examples, and we can tell you if the abatement was satisfactory or not, but we can't tell you exactly how it needs to get fixed. That's up to you to decide. Well, that completes our presentation on the inspection process. That was kind of a drawn-out process. I wanted just a real quick down and dirty layout of what it means when an inspector shows up at your door. So at that point, I hope you got some chat questions. I will get off the line and let the subject matter experts ask some questions.
Really, there hasn't been a lot of questions. It's been real slow. Happy did a real nice job explaining. Again, I just wanted to reiterate a little bit. You know, this isn't the first. What we ask is, in a lot of cases, is pretty straightforward. We'll provide you, if it's documentation, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. We have samples that you can utilize. If it's in terms of slip, trips, falls, yeah, there might be some edges. We can help. We can give you suggestions, but we can't do it for you.
Okay, we received a question, what is a PMA? That is a petition to modify abatement. Sorry if we're talking in acronyms. HAP's been doing a great job of slaying those acronyms, but sometimes one slips through. It's basically an extension. So if you get a packet with citations, you'll usually get somewhere around 30 to 60 days to abate or fix those citations. And in some instances, especially if there's something that's out of your control, say you need to get your boom truck inspected at the street department, the boom truck, and due to circumstances outside of your control, you can't find a company that is certified to inspect your boom truck, and you have no capability to certify it yourself, then that's something that we can consider approving a PMA, which is essentially an extension that would give you an additional amount of time to correct that and abate that hazard.
When I do my record keeping logs, I have been uploading to the federal OSHA. Do I need to submit it to Illinois OSHA? No, you're doing it correctly. We pull our data from the national database. You're fine. Hap, I think we're ready for the next section.
Well, that was quick. That was nice. I built time in to answer lots of questions because that is the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stay on the line and allow people to ask questions. While I've got people here again, I'm going to go over a couple things.
Actually, Hap.
Yep, go ahead.
Do local government units which do not have taxing authority fall under Illinois OSHA jurisdiction? Do local government units that do not have taxing authority fall under OSHA jurisdiction? Local government units, you may receive your funds through another taxing body than you would. If it's a not-for-profit, then you would not. It's a case-by-case basis.
So on that, we have there was I won't give a particular location, but there was a convention center, and there was a complaint for the convention center. It went to federal OSHA. They went and investigated it because the name of the convention center was company or whatever, so it looked like it was private. After the feds walked in and did their opening, they asked some questions and realized that because it was a convention center and they're within a taxing district and they receive taxpayer dollars directly, that it falls under our jurisdiction, so then we took over the investigation. Does workers' comp automatically notify OSHA? Not that I know of.
No. And you have to be careful. Some of our workers' comp carriers here for public entities here in the state will actually produce your OSHA 300 logs on your behalf. It's your responsibility to go through those and make sure they're correct, because a lot of times they'll throw everything on there and they actually are not considered a recordable. So you need to, because you have to sign off on it, you have to make sure it's correct. And make sure everything matches up. Don't rely on your workers' comp carrier to do your OSHA 300 logs solely. It's a great.
That brings up another
point.
Great,
it's a great help, but you can't rely on it fully.
Right. So we go to a lot of small municipalities, and they've got 3 or 4 employees that work there, and they never had a recordable. They've never had recordable incidents in, let's say, 3 or 4 years. And they asked, do we still have to sign and post and keep the 300 logs? And the answer is yes, because that posting of the 300 log from February 1st to April 30th is your employer's certification that there's been no hazards. If it's not posted, it's not certified. If it's not certified, then it didn't happen. So you still have to keep your logs, and you still have to sign them, and still has to be posted. So when we go do an inspection, we're going to ask for the last 5 years of your OSHA 300 logs. And then if there's entries on that, we're going to ask to see the follow-on or the 301s or the investigations you've done. If you don't have to necessarily do a 301, you can also do the workers' comp Illinois Form 45 counts as the investigation portion of it. So you don't have to exactly use the 301. You can use the accident investigation of the Illinois Form 45 will count. So while we're waiting on some questions here, I want to go over again. After this presentation is being recorded, afterwards, I'm going to cut it up with the software I have, and I'm going to upload it to our Illinois Department of Labor YouTube site. So if you want to keep this as a reference, it'll be here. I can't tell you how long it's going to take, but it will be done. And again, I'm going to hit this over and over again. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA.gov. Come here to get training topics and material and get information. If you're looking for posters, do this over here. If you're looking for posters and general information, you can go to Illinois OSHA.
No, we don't have examples of every document that we're going to ask for during an inspection. You should be able to provide us the OSHA 3 relatively quickly. Other than that, it kind of depends on what your hazards are. You can give us a call or send us an email, and we'd be more than happy to discuss your organization and what you need for your applications.
So people often call and ask us about posters. So if you go to Illinois.gov, you can go to, or you can Google us, Illinois OSHA. You can come up here, go to our public safety, Illinois OSHA site. You can get required posters and information here. You can get infographics. Required job safety and health posters are here. You can also file complaints. You can fill out a consultation form for one of our consultants to reach out and help you. This is a good site to go to. If you've got questions, you can frequently get your questions answered here. All right, well, any other questions? If nothing else, I think we'll go ahead and end the presentation. So I'm going to give it a little bit for more.
Will this presentation cover OSHA? Work at home workplaces are not, we traditionally do not do inspections at work at home sites unless on extremely rare occasions there might a fatality occurs and we can associate that with work. Yes, we will post this online, as Hap just said.
Well, it looks like we have a general question about a meeting with employees and trustees. Beverages and snacks were supplied. A trustee and an employee contracts COVID. How's this reported? It's all based on if this was an official activity. Was this mandatory? Were they performing something in the service of the government? Or was this more of a social event and they just happened to be coworkers? That would factor into if this was work-related or not. You know, if the employees are there and they're performing activities to set up for the meeting and they're doing work as an employee, that's one thing. If it's just a gathering that's optional that people can socialize at and it's not business related, that seems like something that'd be more not work-related.
If you have multiple sites under 250 employees, that's correct. You don't have to electronically submit unless you are one of 4 different divisions. Then you do Public Works, Sewer and Sanitation, and Healthcare, nursing homes. You have that slide, Pat?
Which slide is that?
The one on reporting.
Yeah, hold on. Dealing with which part of the report?
Reporting, you know, like not reporting to fatalities, but reporting and your 300 logs.
For the electronic reporting?
At the end of the year. Yeah, electronic reporting slide. Can you pull that one up again, please?
Yep, working on it now.
We don't share jurisdiction with the federal OSHA. Federal OSHA handles all private employers in the state of Illinois. Illinois OSHA handles all public employers.
That one there, Pat?
Thank you. So if you have employees, more than 250 employees at one establishment, you're required to do electronic filing. If you have 20 to 250 employees, and that's in the highway, streets, or highway, so public works, highway, county highway maintenance, then you would have to. Local fire protections also have to. State and local government nursing and residential care facilities are required to if they have more than 20 employees at that establishment. And sewer and water treatment are required to submit electronically file every year. Thank you, App. We were getting a lot of questions.
Okay. Anything else?
No, and I do not believe we're giving certificates out, are we?
No.
Okay, and that's it. The list is kind of exhausted. If I missed one, or if Eric and I missed one, feel free to give Illinois OSHA a call. We'll be more than happy to return your call and get them answered.
So yeah, the best method to do it is to email us. That way, there's a tracking method. Because we try to track all the questions that we ask. That we answer. So if you can email us, that's the preferred method. That way, we have a historical record of what we answered. And that way, because sometimes the questions are very in-depth and it takes us a while to research and to get you the correct answer. Well, I appreciate everybody being on the line. We had over 700 attendees on this at one point in time. So thanks again for everybody. Again, visit osha.gov to gather resource training material. Visit our Illinois OSHA YouTube site for a copy of this presentation. And visit our Illinois Department of Labor OSHA Illinois OSHA site for frequently asked questions, and you can download documents from here as well. Thank you, and have a great day.